When we talk about the fight against breast cancer, it's easy to picture it as one single global battle. But the truth? It's a lot more complicated than that. The story of who gets this disease, and more importantly, who survives it, is really a tale of two completely different worlds. Let's dig into why.
Just think about this number for a second. In 2023 alone, an estimated 2.3 million women were newly diagnosed with breast cancer. To give you some scale, that's more people than the entire city of Houston, Texas. It is, by a long shot, the most common cancer hitting women around the globe.
And in that same year, the disease took the lives of over 764,000 women. That is an enormous human cost. But hiding behind that number is a complex and deeply unequal story that we really need to unpack.
So here's our roadmap. We're going to start by getting a handle on the sheer scale of the problem. Then, we'll dive into this tale of two worlds and ask why the progress in some places isn't being shared everywhere. We'll also look ahead to what 2050 might look like. And finally, we'll talk about what it might take to actually close this devastating gap.
Okay, first things first, let's just establish the baseline. Before we can really get into the differences, we have to understand that breast cancer is a truly universal challenge.
It doesn't matter where on Earth you live. This disease is a major cause of both serious illness and death. It impacts families and communities in every single country, which makes it an absolutely critical focus for global health.
But this is where the story starts to split into two. The experience of having breast cancer is dramatically, and I mean dramatically, different depending on where you call home. This is the central paradox we need to wrap our heads around. And wow, this slide just lays it all out, doesn't it? On one side, in high-income nations, the rate of new cases is pretty much holding steady. And crucially, death rates are actually going down. That's a story of progress. But then you look at the other side, in low-income nations, it's the complete opposite. New cases are climbing fast, and so are the deaths. It's a tale of two realities that are just moving in totally opposite directions.
So the big question is, how did wealthier nations do it? What can we learn from their story? How did they achieve this success?
Let's take the United States as a case study. Between 1975 and 2019, breast cancer deaths there fell by an incredible 58%. That's a massive public health victory, and it shows that with the right approach, this is a winnable fight.
Now, this is what's so fascinating. You might think screening and mammograms were the whole story, and they definitely played a role, about a quarter of the reduction. But look at this. The biggest driver, by far, was treatment. Better therapies for both early-stage and advanced cancer drove more than 3/4 of this success. The takeaway is crystal clear. While catching it early is important, it's the advances in treatment that are truly saving lives on a massive scale.
But, and this is a huge but, that story of progress we just saw stands in stark contrast to the reality in low-resource settings. A very, very different story is unfolding there, one of a widening divide and a crushing burden.
Now, if you just looked at this chart, you might think, okay, breast cancer is way more common in wealthier countries. And technically, based on new cases per person, you'd be right. But looking at this number alone is not just incomplete, it's dangerously misleading.
Because, look at this. This is the slide that tells the real story. Even though the rate of new cases is lower, the mortality rate, the death rate in low-income nations is more than double. Let that sink in. You are more than twice as likely to die from this disease simply because of the country you live in. This reveals a staggering gap in access to the life-saving care that we know works.
And as researchers warned in The Lancet, this isn't just a health crisis, it's a crisis of equity. If we don't take decisive action right now, these inequalities are only going to get worse.
And the burden isn't just physical, it's financial. There's a term for this, catastrophic health expenditure. It sounds academic, but what it means is simple and terrifying. Medical bills so high that they threaten a family's ability to pay for food, for shelter, for their basic needs. You see, in many low and middle-income countries, there's just no safety net. People have to pay for care directly out of their own pocket, and insurance, if it even exists, is often not nearly enough. So a family faces an impossible choice, life-saving medicine or keeping a roof over their heads. For millions, a cancer diagnosis doesn't just threaten a life, it threatens to plunge an entire family into poverty.
So, if we just stay on this course, what does the future look like? Well, the projections are pretty stark.
By the year 2050, the number of new breast cancer cases every year is expected to surge past 3.5 million, and the number of deaths, it's projected to nearly double, to almost 1.4 million women every single year.
The economic fallout from this is just as mind-boggling. The total global economic loss, when you factor in everything from treatment costs to lost productivity, is projected to hit over $21 trillion by 2050. It's an almost incomprehensible number.
So all of this brings us to the final and most important question. How do we close this gap? And it really all comes down to one word: equity. Here's the most important point. The success in high-income countries isn't a fluke, it's proof. It proves that when you invest in screening, diagnosis, and especially in treatment, you can turn the tide on this disease. The rising death tolls in other parts of the world are not inevitable. They are a direct result of health systems that are failing and a tragic lack of access to care.
We know what to do. We have the tools, we have the knowledge. Progress is absolutely 100% possible. The real, defining question for the global community, and for all of us, is whether we have the collective will to make that progress available to everyone no matter where they live.